Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be providing an update to the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, once again, Bitcoin finds itself in a somewhat precarious position. Not a position that it is unfamiliar with, as we've seen Bitcoin do this very thing 3 times this cycle already, and that is where it drops below its 20-week SMA and or 21-week EMA. You can see that it happened in the third quarter of 2023, it happened in the third quarter of 2024, and then it also happened in Q1, early Q2 of 2025. Now, what's interesting is that we've seen this drop below the bull market support band in Q4, right? In Q4. And you could argue, if you look at sort of the dates on this from when we got back above it in 2023, I guess the week of October 16th, it then took 37 weeks to fall back below it. And then when we got above it in 2024, it took about 24 weeks to fall back below it. And then we got back above it in early 2025. Took about 25 weeks to fall back below it. So, you can see that Bitcoin goes through these periods where it spends a lot of time above it, but it's not spent a lot of time below it. And what we've seen so far this cycle is when it has fallen below it, it has stayed down there for a couple of months or so, right? You can see 9 weeks, 11 weeks, and then last time it was actually a lot shorter. It was only 7 weeks. So far, we're currently just in the first couple of weeks of this. Now, the reason why it gets tricky now is because we know, and we cannot ignore it, we know that historically the cycles end in the fourth quarter of the post-halving year. And I understand a lot of people are optimistic about things going on into sort of the next year, and it might be true, right? I'm not going to sit here and say it's impossible, but I think the reality that I am faced with is it's true that the 4-year cycle may eventually break, but it's also true, at least for me, of if it's not broke, don't try and fix it, right? If every cycle has ended in Q4 of the post-halving year, why would I assume that this time is different, right? I wouldn't. And if I'm proven wrong, then I would be willing to then pivot my view going forward and be a little bit more flexible, right? But we've seen that happen time and time again, Q4 of the post-halving year. Now, what's interesting is we talked about this, how you could have a move up into October and hopefully put on a new all-time high, which we did, but we haven't actually seen a continuation of that. You can see that so far, if the top is in, it would still fit within the kind of the expectation of the top being in the fourth quarter of the post-halving year. There's a lot of discourse right now on, the cycle going on into 2026, but that's not really what I'm going to focus on, right? What I'm going to focus on is not whether the cycle goes into the next year for Bitcoin. I think it's more prudent just to say, all right, the cycle likely does end for Bitcoin in this quarter, and now we just have to figure out if the top is in or not, right? Not worry about what may or may not happen in 2026, because for now, I'm still leaning towards next year being a bear market year, just like all the prior midterm years where the market dropped in 2014 and in 2018, and of course in 2022. So I definitely subscribe to the view of if it's not broke, don't fix it. Therefore, I would assume that next year will in fact be a bear market for Bitcoin, and the top would then likely occur sometime in the current quarter. Now, historically, we've seen a few things play out in prior cycles that have not yet played out this cycle. If you look at a lot of the peak indicators, for instance, a lot of them haven't really triggered, right? Like they haven't gone off. And so then it kind of like raises the question, well, are they going to, or are people just waiting for something that's never going to happen? You know, there has been an argument that I've made in the past, and I will continue to make it. And if this argument is correct, it still could mean new all-time highs. But the argument is that what if, because we've been in this quantitative tightening phase for so long, what if this entire Bitcoin rally is sort of more similar to this rally we had right there? I don't necessarily believe that. I'm struggling to sort of think about if that could still be possible. But the only reason I used to talk about it was because that rally back in 2019, like sort of late 2018, early 2019, corresponded to a time when we were going through quantitative tightening. And during that time, Bitcoin dominance was actually going up, right? And so we've seen the same thing happen this cycle. It's just gone on a lot longer, right? So we've had basically it's been a Bitcoin only rally for the most part. Obviously, I don't mean that literally. Certain things other cryptocurrencies have participated in the rally. But when I talk about a Bitcoin only rally, I'm essentially saying Bitcoin's going up and then Bitcoin dominance is going up with it, right? And so if you overlay Bitcoin dominance onto the Bitcoin USD chart, you'll see how Bitcoin dominance went up during that Bitcoin rally while quantitative tightening was going on. So the question then is, are we right here? Like, are we somewhere over here where we saw Bitcoin kind of top out just shortly before quantitative tightening ended? Now, if you look closely at that and you look at certain metrics like alt Bitcoin pairs or Bitcoin dominance, then we should see a final rotation where that liquidity from the altcoin market just rushes back into Bitcoin. And I think that is going to happen, and I think it has been happening for several weeks now, right? You can see Bitcoin dominance is slowly trending higher, and I'm trying to get people to get the memo that, hey, Bitcoin dominance is about to go up a lot more. I mean, 60% is nothing compared to where it likely could be in just a few weeks. So what I want to do then is think about this really closely and you know, to sort of discuss, right, the current top. Right now, Bitcoin's top is at 126K, right? So it's essentially connecting the dots on these prior two peaks, right? If you connect the dots there, you can see that's ultimately where you had that higher high that occurred in October. If you measure the ROI from the low for Bitcoin, you know, it's been about the same cycle length as the last two cycles. So we cannot completely dismiss it. Be that as it may, a lot of the indicators that people have developed over the last few years to identify market cycle tops, like the Pi cycle top indicator and like the risk metrics we talk about and fear and greed and whatnot. But if you look at this stuff, it hasn't really gone to the extremes that you would have expected it to go to, right? If you go look at the terminal price, again, another metric that is still well below where you would expect it to top out at. But the problem is that it could still happen. And I think it makes sense to be open-minded to some of those predictions playing out, you know, being open-minded to it for at least a little bit longer. But I don't think it makes sense to be open-minded to it in 2026. So what I'm saying is, in the short term, be open-minded to it. But if it still hasn't happened by the end of the year, then it's probably not going to this cycle, you know? And that's just the way I see the market. So I'm flexible for now. I'm not deterministic right now about it, right? Like I hope Bitcoin can go up and you know, show the rest of the cryptoverse who's boss over the next few weeks. And maybe some of these top indicators will trigger. But if you go back to that 2019 idea, right, like the quantitative tightening, Bitcoin dominant stuff, you'll notice that during that rally, the top indicators also did not flash, right? I mean, look at 2019, right? It got close to the halfway. I mean, it was like the halfway point, but it didn't go all the way up. And if you look at a lot of the other metrics as well, right, like even the Pi cycle top, which where we were just talking about, back then, you can see they also did not cross in that 2019 rally. So where I am right now is we're sort of looking at the competition between the cyclical view of Bitcoin that says, hey, it tops in Q4 of the post-halving year, And normally all these topping indicators go off. And then you're coupling that with the sort of the monetary policy view of, hey, all these higher interest rates and quantitative tightening maybe did have some effect on the extent that the cryptoverse could go up. When last cycle, the rally that everyone remembers, this one, operated under a different monetary policy regime. That was under interest rates that were basically at zero and money printing like we've really never seen before, at least in our lifetimes. And so the market conditions from a monetary policy point of view still are more similar to this phase over here when it was more so a Bitcoin only rally, right? So you could argue this entire move by Bitcoin has mimicked this rally over here where altcoins didn't really participate. And so for a lot of people that are calling out alt season constantly, you have to remember that the only way you can get that is if the next move by Bitcoin is a parabolic rally up, which it's not completely impossible. I mean, in 2017, Bitcoin had a parabolic rally up, and it's not like we were under quantitative easing. You know, you can look at the chart. You can see over here that Bitcoin was moving up, even though the balance sheet was basically flat, if not with a slightly downward bias, right? So I'm not saying you can't have a parabolic rally just because quantitative tightening is going on. We actually saw that happen in 2017. My point is this, is if we're going to get it, it's going to happen in the next 2 months. Because if it doesn't happen in the next 2 months, then it's not going to happen this cycle, is my opinion. That's my opinion. So what would happen is if by the end of the year, Bitcoin still hasn't had the parabolic rally, then you would start to see it go into this phase where people want it to go higher and it feels like it should, but then we just start putting in lower highs. We have not gone through that process yet, right? Like Bitcoin has not yet put in a macro lower high. Bitcoin just put in a new high this month. So we're not here yet. But my point is, if by December, let's take the optimistic view. Let's take the optimistic view. If by December, Bitcoin has been able to recover back above the bull market support band, and if it is able to get one final rally before the cycle's over, and let's just speculate on where it might go, right? Like if it goes to one of these trend lines, then you have to recognize that there exists a scenario where Bitcoin does go to all-time highs, but it doesn't necessarily lead to all the indicators flashing in the way that you might expect. Even the indicators that you would expect to flash, like the Pi cycle top, because it did a good job last cycle, likely won't signal this cycle, even if there is a parabolic rally. One of the reasons for that is if you divide the moving averages, you can see that every cycle we've seen diminishing peaks, and the next peak would be below 1 if you extrapolate, which any good engineer knows not to do. But if you were to extrapolate, it would suggest the next peak will not go above 1, meaning the moving averages will not cross, meaning the Pi cycle top will not trigger if you use it in the conventional sense. So if that's true, then it might mean that a lot of the other topping indicators might not signal in the conventional sense. They might give a signal if you dig deeper into the data, but it might not be there at a surface level. So I think in the short term, it makes sense to be open-minded about what the next 2 months could hold. And the reason I say that is because, you know, I'm over here seeing what I want to see because Bitcoin dominance is going up. So people are getting the memo. In fact, if you want to compare this to 2019, which is kind of silly, I understand, but if you want to, you could say that we're right here, right? We're right here at this level where it's mid-June. And during that final rotation where dominance exploded to the upside, just as quantitative tightening ended, there was another all-time high by Bitcoin, but it would still not lead to a lot of the topping indicators signaling, right? If Bitcoin were to go to 130K or 140 or even 150K, a lot of these signals just aren't going to go off. You would need to see higher prices for them to signal. So do not be complacent in this quarter. Now, I'll tell you what I'm looking at to give me validation in my own mind that the top would be in. Okay, and I've said a few of them before, and I'll just go through them again. I think, and I know there's already people saying that this time is different, but I don't believe that it is. What I think, and I even said this when I started my channel back in 2019, that when Bitcoin closes, the weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, sometime by the end of the post-halving year or going into the midterm year, the cycle's over, right? The cycle's over. And you can see in 2021, 2022, we fell below the 50-week moving average, and it meant the cycle was over. People were not willing to accept it, but that's what it meant. It meant the same thing in 2017, and it meant the same thing in 2013. So, or I guess that was in 2014, but it was from the 2013 cycle. So you have 2013, 2014, you have 2017, 2018, and then you have 2021, 2022. And so when I look at this chart, I feel like I have to believe that this time is not different. And if and when the 50-week moving average is breached on 2 weekly closes, then I have to start wondering if that means the cycle's over. You can see that the real bull market support band for Bitcoin this cycle has not been the 20-week SMA. It's more so been the 50-week moving average, because that's where Bitcoin continues to find support. If you look at the weekly RSI of Bitcoin, you'll notice that it continues to find support right around 44 or so. Currently, it's at 49. So if Bitcoin were to slowly just, consolidate here for a while at the 50-week moving average, perhaps the next bounce would come on a retest of that RSI. But the point that I want to make here is that at this point, we cannot fully know if we're going to see this final rally or not, like we've seen in all the prior cycles. Right? We cannot know for sure, but what we can theoretically know, not necessarily for sure, but with strong confidence, is that if you do get a rally from here, it has to be Bitcoin led, right? Like Bitcoin would have to lead it. And so a lot of people are kind of like, they're pining for alt season, but what they risk is if we're here and not in these areas, right? Then Bitcoin could still take that liquidity and not give it back, right? And not give it back in the sense of an alt season. So the way you get that is Bitcoin has to go parabolic first. But if Bitcoin doesn't go parabolic, then there's no reason to diversify into all these altcoins, because they're just going to keep on bleeding to Bitcoin. But by staying with the king, it gives you exposure to the upside. So if there is a parabolic rally into the end of the year, Bitcoin's got to lead the way. And altcoins won't start moving in any durable fashion until after Bitcoin takes out the prior all-time high. And that's been the case the entire cycle. So for me, I'm open-minded for the next couple of months. I'd like to see Bitcoin take the reins. One of the things I said previously is that to have some type of confirmation that that's possible, you'd want to see Bitcoin dominance go up. Well, it's been going up for 6 weeks straight, right? So, check. If you look at alt Bitcoin pairs and look at the value that they're at right now, you can make the comparison to 2017, because alt Bitcoin pairs were basically at this exact same level in October of 2017. And eventually they had a parabolic rally, right? Alts had this parabolic rally against Bitcoin. But during the devaluation process, Bitcoin was going up. Now, the devaluation process is while Bitcoin, it's been going up a little bit, but it's also been kind of moving down some too, off and on, right? It hasn't really given that same clear direction that 2017 gave. But if you look at the current alt Bitcoin valuation, you'll also notice it was the same level in 2019 as well. And in that case, that final rotation, Bitcoin again still did hit a new all-time high. But by the time Bitcoin dominance started going down, it wasn't because of alt season. It was because altcoins were just not dropping as much as Bitcoin in sort of that intermediate, 9-month bear market in the middle of the last cycle. So the way I would think about it is like this. For now, if you're going to stick with anything in crypto, it still makes sense to focus on Bitcoin. Because even if this is not 2017 or 2021, even if it's 2019, there still is a chance that Bitcoin could hold on for a while, right? And even in 2019, remember, Bitcoin basically stayed near the highs for many, many months once the top was actually in. If we are going to get a final rally to the cycle where Bitcoin at least gets closer to setting some of these top indicators off, altcoins are not going to lead the way, right? It has to be Bitcoin to lead. So the best thing that I can do, right, as an investor is limit most of my exposure within the cryptocurrency asset class, limit it to Bitcoin. That doesn't mean I don't own anything else. Obviously, I do have some Ethereum as well, but limit most of it to Bitcoin. Because the only way the cycle can continue from here is if Bitcoin can hold above the 50-week moving average on weekly closes. And the only way is if Bitcoin leads back to all-time highs. Because if you don't get that, if Bitcoin cannot lead back up, then altcoins would get absolutely decimated in the carnage on the way down. So that's the way I'm viewing this. It's late October. There's going to be a pivot point soon for all Bitcoin pairs. Not yet. It still makes sense to be bullish on Bitcoin dominance for now. So get off. I'm saying right now, dominance is going to go up a lot over the next week and a half, is my guess. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer. But I would say over the next 1 to 2 weeks, dominance should go up a lot. And it should go well above 60%. Let's see how this plays out. I have to be open-minded to things. I cannot go into this, trade the market in front of you. Trade the market in front of you, not the market that you want, right? Obviously, a lot of you guys just want alt season so badly, so you can just sell your bags and forget about altcoins for the rest of your life. But trade the market in front of you, not the market that you want. And again, the market in front of you is saying that the only way we can proceed from here in a positive way for alts is if Bitcoin leads the way first. And that's why you're seeing all this liquidity flow back to Bitcoin. Because I'm not the only one getting that memo, right? Other people are getting that memo too, because you can see that Bitcoin dominance is just slowly trending back up because people are capitulating on their altcoins, right? And we've seen that happen every single cycle. So with Bitcoin, we're currently below the bull market support band. It's not the first time it's happened. I want to go ahead and mention this now because when I mention it later, people are going to get upset. But if price action stays suppressed, we're likely going to see a death cross. Now, one of the things about death crosses is while they sound scary, they usually correspond to lows in the market. Okay? Oftentimes, they correspond to lows. You can see in 2023 and 2024 and early 2025, they actually marked the yearly low. So I would argue that there's a good chance we'll have a death cross soon. And perhaps, like it always has, it'll correspond to a local low. In 2019, when we had a death cross, there was a massive rally. It was a lower high, but still a great rally. So my thesis on death crosses has always been this. They're lagging indicators. You do not wait for a death cross to sell Bitcoin. When the death cross arrives, it usually means the bad price action has already happened, and therefore it's time for short-term relief, whether it leads to new all-time highs or not. So the 50-day SMA, the 200-day SMA, they're probably going to cross in the next few weeks. So watch for that. That would likely correspond to a local low in the market when it happens. And if we cannot pump between now and then that will be the best chance to get another rally before this cycle's over. Because You know, I mean, you could have argued that we should have already had one, but we haven't, right? And Bitcoin just kind of continues in this slump. The 50-day SMA right now is at a 114. The 200-day is at 108. So, you know, if you just extend these out a little bit, you know, you can kind of see that they'll cross before too long, right? Within the next few weeks, they'll cross. And so that will likely correspond to a local low, and that will likely be the best chance that Bitcoin has to ignite something. Now, honestly, I mean, I know people are gonna be like, well, what about the rate cuts? What about, you know, talk about into quantitative tightening? What about all this and that? But again, the argument is that it's all in the charts anyways, right? You know, I've said before, you don't even necessarily need to know anything about monetary policy or any of that stuff to be able to look at the Bitcoin dominance chart for the last 3-4 years and know that it looks bullish. The only reason that people were able to look at it and think that it looked bearish was generally because they just were loaded up on altcoins and they were, you know, financially incentivized to believe differently. So you could always argue that everything is already in the chart and that the death cross that is likely going to be coming up in a few weeks might be Bitcoin's best chance to reignite something, because nothing's happened yet, and you know, I don't really know how long we're going to wait, right, for something to happen. What I will say is that if there is no significant move, like we had one in October, right, to a new high. If we don't have one in November, then by December, people are going to start losing faith in the cycle going on like it normally does, right? In terms of the parabolic rally to finish the cycle. Because there's going to be a lot of people like me that have been around for so long that it's going to be hard to believe that that Bitcoin would then rally into 2026. Maybe it will, but it's going to be hard for people to believe that. So if we can't make new highs by December, then it might be time to face an uncomfortable truth. But until that time, until we get weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, there's still some reason to stay optimistic. If that changes, and I've said it every single time, right? If that changes, then the bias might have to change. But it hasn't changed all cycle. And when it does, I won't be as I might start to be a little bit more deterministic of what things look like next year. But again, for now, I think it's more so, you know, you want to give Bitcoin the time to sort of stretch in Q4 of the post-halving year, but you also do not want to be complacent, because we know that Bitcoin's tops are always in Q4 of the post-halving year. The thing about this is, I've said this before, is that if the top is not in, you're going to be better off with Bitcoin than basically everything else in crypto, because Bitcoin leads the bull market. And if the top is in, the 5 to 10% drop that it would take to kind of confirm that the top is in, weekly closes below 100K, would be a lot less painful than the 30 to 50% drops you would likely see altcoins experience if Bitcoin were to do that. So I still argue, as I have the entire cycle, Bitcoin remains the better play compared to other cryptocurrencies for the entire cycle, but also in the very, very short term, for at least the next 2 weeks, maybe a week and a half. Let's see where things go. That's all I want to say about today. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.